Kethral stood on the observation deck of the Valorian warship and watched the human vessel emerge from the darkness of space. It was smaller than he expected. The ship was called the Defiance, and it moved through the void with a strange grace that made him uncomfortable. He had heard stories about humans, but he had never seen one with his own eyes. The war against the Sketh Horde had lasted for 3 generations. Kethral's grandfather had fought them. His father had died fighting them. Now Kethral carried the burden of a conflict that seemed endless. The Valorian Dominion was tired. Their numbers grew smaller with each passing year, and the Sketh showed no signs of stopping. They bred faster than the Valorians could kill them. They felt no fear and knew no mercy. When the Valorian High Council announced that they had formed an alliance with the humans of Earth, many soldiers celebrated. Fresh troops meant fresh hope, but Kethral did not celebrate. He had read the reports about humanity. They were a young species, barely capable of interstellar travel. They had only made contact with the galactic community 30 years ago. What could such primitive creatures offer against an enemy like the Sketh? The Defiance docked with the station above Velkar Prime, and Kethral was ordered to join the welcoming party. He walked through the corridors with his fellow soldiers, their armored scales clicking against the metal floor. Valorians were built for war. They stood nearly 8 feet tall with natural armor covering their bodies. Their claws could tear through steel, and their venom could kill most species within minutes. They were perfect predators, shaped by millions of years of evolution on a harsh and unforgiving world. The airlock opened, and the humans stepped through. Kethral felt his heart sink. They were so small. The tallest among them barely reached his shoulder. Their skin was soft and exposed, with no scales or plates to protect them. They had no claws, no fangs, no venom glands. Their eyes were forward-facing like predators, but everything else about them screamed prey. They wore artificial armor made of metal and fabric, a poor substitute for what nature had failed to give them. Their commander walked at the front of the group. Her name was Katie Brennan, and she moved with a confidence that seemed almost foolish given her fragile form. She had brown hair tied back from her face and eyes the color of a stormy sky. When she saw the Valorian generals waiting to greet her, she smiled. Kethral did not understand the smile. The Valorians were about to send these creatures into battle against the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy, and their leader was smiling. Perhaps humans were too simple to understand the danger they faced. The formal greetings took place in the station's main hall. Kethral stood with his battalion and watched as the human soldiers filed in behind their commander. There were perhaps 200 of them. They would be attached to the Valorian forces as support units during the campaign to retake the colony world of Setheri IV. Kethral studied them carefully. A tall male with dark skin and broad shoulders stood near the front. His name tag read Torres. Beside him was a lighter-skinned male with sharp features and restless eyes. His tag said Cole. They spoke to each other in low voices, and occasionally one of them would laugh. They were laughing before a war. Kethral leaned toward his clutch brother Versan and spoke quietly. These creatures are going to die very quickly. Versan made a sound of agreement. Look at them. They have no natural weapons at all. The Sketh will tear them apart. It is a waste of resources to transport them here, Kethral said. We should have asked for weapons or supplies instead of these soft animals. The ceremony ended, and the soldiers were dismissed to prepare for deployment. Kethral returned to his quarters and began recording his personal log, as he did before every campaign. He spoke into the device about the arrival of the humans, about his doubts and his disappointment. He described their fragile bodies and their strange behavior. They require a specific mixture of gases to breathe, he noted. They must consume water constantly, or their bodies fail. Their internal temperature must be maintained within a narrow range, or they die. They are so poorly designed that I wonder how they survived long enough to develop technology at all. He paused the recording and sat in silence for a long moment. The truth was that Kethril had hoped for salvation. The war had taken so much from him. He had watched friends die in battles that achieved nothing. He had buried clutch brothers and sworn oaths of vengeance that he could never fulfill. When he heard that allies were coming from a distant world called Earth, he had allowed himself to hope. Now that hope felt foolish. He resumed the recording. I will do my duty. I will fight alongside these humans and try to keep them alive for as long as possible. But I do not expect them to survive their first engagement with the Sketh. They are simply not built for war. The next morning, the combined forces gathered in the deployment bay. Kethril found himself standing near a group of human soldiers who were checking their weapons. One of them, a female with red hair and pale skin, noticed him watching and nodded in greeting. First time fighting with humans? She asked. Kethril was surprised that she spoke to him at all. Yes, I'm Megan, she said. Megan Russo, combat medic. I am Kethril of the 3rd Fang Battalion. Megan smiled at him. It was the same strange expression he had seen on Commander Brand's face. Don't worry about us, she said. We're tougher than we look. Kethril did not know how to respond to that. He had seen her species. He knew exactly how tough they looked. They looked like something the Sketh would eat for a light meal. I hope you are right, he said, because it seemed like the polite thing to say. The transport ships launched, carrying them towards Setheri 4. Kethril sat in the hold with his battalion, surrounded by the sounds of warriors preparing for battle. Nearby, the humans sat in their own section. Some of them slept. Some of them talked quietly. One of them was reading something on a small device, as if they were not about to descend into hell. Kethril closed his eyes and tried to calm his mind. He told himself that the humans were not his responsibility. He would focus on killing Sketh and staying alive. If the humans died quickly, at least they might serve as a distraction while the Valorian forces achieved their objectives. It was a cold thought, but war was cold. Kethril had learned that lesson long ago. The transport shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Setheri 4. Through the small window beside him, Kethril could see the surface of the planet rushing up to meet them. Somewhere down there, the Sketh were waiting. He gripped his weapon and prepared himself for the battle to come. The crystalline valleys of Setheri 4 glittered in the pale light of the twin suns. Beautiful spires of blue and purple stone rose from the ground like frozen flames. It was a sacred place to the Valorians, one of the first worlds their ancestors had colonized. Now it belonged to the Sketh, and the combined forces had come to take it back. Kethril moved through the valley with his battalion, his weapon ready. The plan was simple. The Valorian forces would advance through the main pass while the humans provided support from the flanks. Intelligence suggested that the Sketh presence in this sector was light. A quick strike, a clean victory, and they would establish a forward base for the larger campaign. The intelligence was wrong. The Sketh came from everywhere at once. They burst from hidden tunnels in the crystal walls. They dropped from the spires above. They poured out of the shadows like a living flood of teeth and claws and hatred. There were hundreds of them. Thousands. The Valorian line shattered within seconds. Kethril fired his weapon until it overheated. He slashed with his claws and bit with his fangs. Around him, his brothers fell. Brazan took a Sketh blade through his throat and died without making a sound. The air filled with screams and the wet sounds of tearing flesh. This was the end. Kethril knew it with absolute certainty. They had walked into a trap, and now they would all die in this beautiful, terrible place. Then he heard the humans. It was not a scream of fear. It was something else entirely. A roar, a challenge. A sound that seemed to shake the very stones beneath his feet. Kethrol turned and saw Sergeant Adam Vance leading a charge directly into the thickest concentration of Sketh. The human was not retreating. He was not seeking cover. He was attacking. His weapon blazed in his hands, and his voice carried over the chaos of battle. Push forward. Don't give them an inch. The humans followed him. All of them. They moved like a single creature with 100 bodies. They fired and advanced, stepping over their fallen comrades without slowing down. A Sketh warrior leaped at Vance, and he killed it with the butt of his rifle before it could reach him. On the other side of the valley, Katie Brennan was leading another group through terrain that the Valorian tacticians had marked as impassable. Kethrol watched her soldiers climb the sheer crystal faces with nothing but their bare hands and simple tools. They reached a position above the Sketh and began firing down into the enemy ranks. The Sketh, for the first time since the ambush began, started to fall. Kethrol found himself fighting alongside a human named Derek Cole. The man was bleeding from a wound on his face, but he did not seem to notice. He moved with a strange economy of motion, killing Sketh with precise shots that never missed. When his weapon ran dry, he drew a blade from his belt and kept fighting. "Stay close," Cole shouted at him. "We're breaking through." Breaking through. The humans were actually breaking through. Kethrol followed. He did not know what else to do. The world had stopped making sense, and the only solid thing in the chaos was this small, fragile human who fought like a demon from the old stories. The battle lasted for 3 hours. By the end, the valley floor was covered with bodies. Most of them were Sketh. The humans had turned an ambush into a victory through sheer aggression and refusal to accept defeat. Kethrol sat on a rock and tried to catch his breath. His body ached. His scales were cracked in several places, and blood seeped from a dozen wounds. But he was alive. Against all odds, he was alive. He watched Megan Russo work. The human medic moved through the battlefield like a ghost, checking bodies and treating the wounded. She did not distinguish between human and Valorian. When she found an injured soldier, she helped them. Simple as that. A Sketh survivor burst from a pile of corpses and lunged at her. Kethrol shouted a warning, but he was too far away to help. Megan spun, drew her sidearm, and shot the creature 3 times in the chest. It fell at her feet, and she stepped over it without breaking stride. She had been wounded at some point during the battle. Her shoulder was wrapped in a bloody bandage, and she moved her left arm stiffly. But she did not stop. She did not rest. She kept working until every wounded soldier had been treated. That night, the survivors made camp in a defensive position at the edge of the valley. Kethrol could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the battle again. He saw his brothers dying. He saw the humans charging. He walked through the camp and found a group of human soldiers sitting around a small heat source. They were talking and laughing. One of them was telling a story about something that had happened during the fighting, and the others were reacting with groans and chuckles. Laughing. They were laughing again. Kethrol approached them slowly. Ryan Torres noticed him first and made room for him to sit. The Valorian hesitated, then lowered himself to the ground beside the humans. "Rough day," Torres said. "Yes," Kethrol agreed. "I have never seen anything like what your people did today." Torres shrugged. "We just did what we had to do." "No," Kethrol shook his head. "You did more than that. I saw one of your soldiers. He was wounded, bleeding from many places. He picked up a fallen comrade's weapon and kept fighting." "Why?" The humans exchanged glances. A younger soldier named Tyler Sims answered. "Because the fight wasn't over yet, but he was dying." "We're all dying," Sims said. "Every day, a little bit more. Might as well make it count for something." Kethrol did not understand. He wanted to understand, but the words did not make sense to him. The Valorians valued survival. They fought to live. These humans seemed to fight for something else entirely, something he could not name. He returned to his sleeping area, but still could not rest. He lay on his back and stared at the alien stars above and thought about what he had witnessed. The humans had charged into certain death and somehow emerged victorious. They had taken wounds that should have stopped them and kept moving. They had faced an enemy that terrified even the Valorians and treated it like a minor inconvenience. For the first time since the alliance was announced, Kethral felt something other than pity when he thought about humanity. He felt something that might have been respect. He also felt something else, something smaller and colder that lived in the deepest part of his mind. He did not recognize it yet. He did not know that it would grow with each passing day. The campaign continued for weeks. Battle followed battle, and the combined forces pushed deeper into Sketh-held territory. Kethral found himself assigned to a reconnaissance unit led by a human lieutenant named Nathan Cruz. At first, he resented the assignment. He was a warrior, not a scout. But as the days passed, he began to appreciate the work. It was quieter than the front lines, and it gave him time to think. More importantly, it gave him time to talk with Nathan. The human lieutenant was different from the others Kethral had met. He was calm and thoughtful, with a patience that seemed unusual for his species. He answered questions without becoming defensive, and he asked questions of his own with genuine curiosity. Slowly, a strange friendship began to form between them. One night, as they waited in a hidden position watching a Sketh patrol route, Kethral finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the battle in the Crystalline Valley. "Why do your people fight the way you do?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "What do you mean?" "You are fragile. You have no natural weapons. Everything about your bodies suggests that you should be prey, not predators. Yet I have watched your soldiers charge into situations that would make a Valorian hesitate. I have seen humans continue fighting after suffering wounds that should have killed them. I do not understand how this is possible." Nathan smiled slightly. "It's complicated. I have time." The human shifted his position and looked up at the unfamiliar stars. "Have you ever heard of adrenaline?" Kethral shook his head. "It's a chemical that our bodies produce when we're in danger, when we're scared, when we're angry, when we're fighting for our lives. It floods our system and changes everything. Our hearts beat faster. Our muscles get stronger. We stop feeling pain. For a little while, we become something more than we normally are. A chemical makes you stronger? It's more than that. It suppresses fear. It pushes aside everything except the immediate moment. When the adrenaline is flowing, nothing exists except the enemy in front of you and the need to survive." Kethral considered this. But the effects must end eventually. "What happens then?" "Then we crash, hard. The pain comes back. The fear comes back. Sometimes people shake for hours afterward. Sometimes they cry." Nathan paused. "But in the moment, when it matters most, we can do things that should be impossible. Is that why your wounded soldiers keep fighting?" "The adrenaline?" "Partly. But there's something else too. Humans evolved as persistence predators." Kethral did not recognize the term. "Explain." "On our homeworld, we were not the strongest animals. We were not the fastest. We had no claws or fangs or venom. But we had one advantage that nothing else had. We could run forever. That seems unlikely." Nathan laughed softly. "It's true. Most animals sprint fast but tire quickly. They rely on bursts of speed to catch prey or escape predators. But humans can maintain a steady pace for hours, days even. Our ancestors would chase an animal until it collapsed from exhaustion. We would simply refuse to stop." Catherall tried to imagine this. A soft, weak creature pursuing something larger and faster, not through strength or speed, but through sheer stubbornness. It was a disturbing image. We call it persistence hunting, Nathan continued. And that instinct is still inside us. When a human decides that something matters, they will pursue it until they succeed or die trying. Giving up is not something we do well. But surely there are limits. Surely your bodies must fail eventually. Yes, our bodies can fail. But here's the strange thing. Nathan looked at Catherall with something like amusement in his eyes. Sometimes they don't. I do not understand. Humans have been documented lifting vehicles off trapped children, running on broken legs, surviving injuries that should have been fatal within seconds. Our medical experts still don't fully understand it. There's something in us, some override switch, that can push us past every physical limitation when the stakes are high enough. Catherall remembered the battle in the valley. He remembered the human soldier with the lacerations, picking up a fallen weapon and continuing to fire. He remembered Megan Russo, wounded and exhausted, refusing to stop treating the injured. You said your people are afraid, he said slowly. You said the adrenaline suppresses fear. But I have seen humans who were clearly frightened still choose to fight. How do you explain that? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Have you ever heard the human word spite? No. It's difficult to translate. It means doing something specifically because someone or something doesn't want you to. Continuing to fight not because you think you'll win, but because you refuse to give your enemy the satisfaction of seeing you give up. That seems irrational. It is. It is. Completely irrational. And incredibly human. Nathan's voice grew softer. We are afraid, always. Fear is part of being human. But we learned a long time ago that fear doesn't have to stop us. We can be terrified and still move forward. We can know that we're going to die and still spit in death's face. The Scath patrol passed below their position, and both soldiers fell silent. Catherall watched the enemy move through the darkness and thought about everything Nathan had told him. He was beginning to understand something important, something that changed the way he viewed the humans. They were not weak despite their fragile bodies. They were something else entirely. They were creatures who had looked at a universe that gave them nothing and decided to conquer it anyway. They had taken their fear and their pain and their soft, breakable flesh and turned it all into weapons. When the patrol was gone, Catherall spoke again. I called your people soft when I first met them. I was wrong. We get that a lot, Nathan said. What you are is worse than soft. You are broken in ways that make you dangerous. Nathan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, that's one way to put it. I think I am beginning to understand why the Scath have not defeated you. The Scath made the same mistake you did. They saw small creatures with no natural weapons and assumed we would be easy prey. Nathan's voice hardened. They learned differently. Catherall thought about the war. He thought about the generations of fighting, the endless casualties, the slow grinding defeat of his people. The Valorians had been fighting the Scath for so long, and they had never found a way to win. They were stronger. They were better equipped. They were superior in almost every measurable way. But they had never been willing to die out of spite. He looked at Nathan Cruz, this small and fragile human, and saw something that frightened him more than any Scath ever had. He saw a predator wearing the skin of prey. He saw a creature that would chase you across the universe. Not because it was hungry, but because you tried to run. He saw humanity dot and the ancient city of Veltharn had stood for 10,000 years before the Scath came. Now it was a ruin, its beautiful spires broken, its sacred halls filled with the enemy. The Scath had made it their stronghold on Setheri IV, and the combined forces had come to tear it from their grasp. Cathrall stood with the assault teams at the edge of the city, waiting for the order to attack. The plan was aggressive but sound. 3 strike forces would hit the Sketh positions simultaneously, overwhelming their defenses before they could organize a response. Intelligence suggested the enemy numbers were manageable. A hard fight, but a winnable one. The intelligence was wrong again. The assault began well. The strike forces breached the outer defenses and pushed into the city. Cathrall fought alongside Nathan Cruz and his reconnaissance team, clearing buildings and securing positions. For a few hours, it seemed like victory was possible. Then the tunnels opened. The Sketh had been hiding underground, waiting for the attackers to commit themselves. Thousands of warriors poured out of hidden passages throughout the city. The 3 strike forces were suddenly surrounded, cut off from each other and from any hope of escape. General Varthan's voice crackled over the communication channel. All units, fall back to the extraction point. Repeat, all units fall back. We cannot hold the city. Cathrall felt relief wash through him. Retreat meant survival. He began to move toward the designated coordinates, but Nathan grabbed his arm. Wait, we have orders. We must retreat. Listen. Cathrall listened. Over the chaos of battle, he could hear Commander Brennan's voice on the human communication channel. Negative on the retreat order. We have wounded in the field. We are not leaving them behind. General Varthan responded immediately. Human Commander, this is not a request. Your forces will withdraw. General, with respect, you can take your orders and shove them straight up your... The channel cut off abruptly. Cathrall stared at Nathan in disbelief. She just refused a direct order from the commanding general. Yeah. Nathan checked his weapon and started moving toward the sounds of the heaviest fighting. She does that. The human forces did not retreat. Instead, they consolidated their positions and began evacuating their wounded. Commander Brennan set up a command post in a ruined temple and started coordinating a defensive perimeter. Ryan Torres organized the soldiers into fire teams. Derek Cole volunteered to hold a narrow choke point that connected 2 sections of the city. I can hold them here for an hour, Cole said. Maybe more. That's a death sentence, Nathan told him. Maybe. Cole smiled. It was a strange smile, calm and peaceful. But it buys time. And that's what we need. He walked toward the choke point and did not look back. Cathrall found himself fighting beside Megan Russo again. The medic was covered in blood, most of it not her own. She had abandoned any pretense of staying out of combat and was fighting with the same ferocity as any soldier. Between engagements, she would stop to treat a wounded comrade, then pick up her weapon and return to the line. You should retreat, Cathrall told her. The general ordered it. Megan shook her head. We don't leave our people behind. You will all die here. Maybe. She fired at an approaching Sketh and watched it fall. But not today, and not without a fight. The battle raged for hours. The Sketh threw wave after wave at the human positions, and each wave broke against the defenders like water against stone. The humans took casualties. Of course they took casualties. They were outnumbered and surrounded and fighting in an indefensible position. But they did not break. Cathrall watched a young soldier named Tyler Sims pick up a weapon he had never been trained on after his own rifle was destroyed. The human figured out how to use it in the middle of a firefight and kept shooting. He watched another soldier, wounded so badly that she could not stand, prop herself against a wall and provide covering fire for her squad. He watched Derek Cole hold his choke point for 3 hours before finally falling. When the Sketh overran Cole's position, they found the bodies of more than 200 of their warriors scattered around him. The human had been stabbed 11 times. He had killed 30 more Sketh after receiving his first wound. Commander Brennan received the news of Cole's death without expression. She simply nodded and said, "He did his job." Then she returned to coordinating the defense. As night fell, something strange began to happen. The Sketh attacks became less frequent, less coordinated. For the first time in the battle, the enemy seemed to hesitate. Catherall did not understand it. The Sketh had overwhelming numbers. They should have crushed the human positions hours ago. But they were pulling back, regrouping, watching the human defenses with something that looked almost like fear. Nathan appeared beside him, exhausted and bloody. "They're scared. The Sketh do not feel fear. They do now." Nathan pointed toward the enemy lines. "They've never seen anything like us. They expected us to retreat or surrender. They expected us to die quickly. Instead, we've been killing them for hours. We've taken everything they've thrown at us and kept fighting. You are still outnumbered. You cannot win." "No, probably not." Nathan's voice was calm, almost peaceful. "But they don't know that. All they know is that every time they attack, more of them die. They're starting to wonder how many more they'll lose before it's over." The Sketh did not attack again that night. When morning came, scouts reported that the enemy was withdrawing from the city. Not retreating, withdrawing. They were giving up a position they had held for years because a few 100 humans had refused to die. Catherall sat in the ruins of the temple and tried to process what had happened. He had watched the humans sustain casualties that should have broken any army. He had seen them lose friends and comrades. He had seen them weep over fallen bodies and then pick up their weapons and keep fighting. Commander Brennan walked through the survivors, checking on her people. When she reached Catherall, she stopped. "You stayed," she said. "You didn't have to. I did not understand why you refused to retreat. And now..." Catherall looked at the human commander. She was small and soft and fragile. Her eyes were red from exhaustion and grief. But she stood straight, and her voice was steady, and something in her gaze made him want to look away. "Now I understand," he said. "You were not fighting to win. You were fighting because you could not accept any other option." Brennan nodded. "We call it holding the line. Sometimes that's all you can do. Sometimes that's enough." She moved on, and Catherall watched her go. He thought about Derek Cole dying in that choke point. He thought about Megan Russo treating wounded soldiers while bleeding herself. He thought about Katie Brennan defying a general because she refused to leave people behind. The Valorians fought to survive. The humans fought for something else. Something that did not have a word in Catherall's language. Later, he learned that the humans called it honor. He also learned that they called it love. And he began to understand that these saw. The war ended on the Sketh homeworld. Catherall never thought he would live to see it. Generations of his people had fought and died against the Sketh, and the idea that the conflict could actually end seemed like a dream. But the humans had changed everything. Their strange persistence, their refusal to accept defeat, had spread through the Alliance like a disease. The Valorians had begun fighting differently. They had learned to hold the line. The final assault was led by Commander Brennan and what remained of her forces from the Defiance. Catherall fought beside Nathan Cruz, just as he had for months. They had become something that Catherall had never expected. They had become friends. The Sketh capital was a fortress built into the side of a great mountain. It had never been breached in the entire history of the species. The Sketh believed it was impregnable. They believed that even if their fleets fell and their colonies burned, they would survive behind those ancient walls. They were wrong. The assault took 3 days. 3 days of constant fighting, of advancing meter by meter through defenses that had been designed to stop entire armies. The humans led the way, pushing forward when the Valorians would have stopped to rest. They did not sleep. They barely ate. They simply kept moving, kept killing, kept advancing. Catherall watched them with a mixture of awe and horror. On the second day, he saw a human soldier named Cooper take a wound that should have been fatal. The man kept fighting for another 4 hours before finally collapsing. The medics saved him, barely, but he would never walk again. When Catherall asked him if he regretted continuing to fight, Cooper looked at him with tired eyes and said, "We were winning. Wasn't going to miss that." On the third day, they breached the inner fortress. The fighting was brutal. Close-quarters combat in narrow corridors designed to favor the defenders. The Sketh fought with the desperation of a species facing extinction. They threw everything they had at the attackers. It was not enough. Nathan Cruz died in the final push. He took a Sketh blade meant for Catherall, stepping in front of his friend without hesitation. The weapon pierced his chest, and he fell. Catherall caught him before he hit the ground. "Stupid," Catherall said, his voice breaking. "You stupid human. Why did you do that?" Nathan smiled. Blood stained his teeth. "Because you're my friend. Because that's what friends do." He died in Catherall's arms, still smiling. Catherall carried his body through the final assault. He killed every Sketh that stood in his way with a fury he had never felt before. When the Sketh command center fell and their leaders surrendered, Catherall was standing in the middle of a room full of enemy corpses, covered in blood that was not his own. Commander Brennan found him there. She looked at Nathan's body, at the devastation Catherall had caused, and she simply nodded. "He would have been proud of you," she said. "He should not have died for me. No, he shouldn't have died at all. None of them should have." Brennan's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "But that's not how war works. People die. Good people. The best people. And all we can do is make their deaths mean something." The Sketh surrendered unconditionally. For the first time in their history, they accepted defeat. The war that had lasted for generations was finally over. In the weeks that followed, the galactic community tried to make sense of what had happened. How had a young species, barely capable of interstellar travel, helped turn the tide of a conflict that had seemed unwinnable? How had these soft, fragile creatures achieved what the Valorians could not? A journalist from the Valorian Information Network asked Catherall for an interview. He was considered an expert on humanity now. He had fought beside them longer than almost any other Valorian. The journalist asked him to describe what it was like to fight alongside humans. Catherall was silent for a long time before answering. "When I first met them, I thought they were fragile," he said. "Their bodies are weak. They have no natural weapons. They must wear armor because their skin cannot protect them. They must carry water because they dry out. They must breathe a specific mixture of gases because their lungs are inefficient. Everything about them suggests that they should be prey." The journalist waited. "Then I thought they were brave. I watched them charge into battles they could not win. I watched them take wounds that should have killed them and keep fighting. I thought that courage was their strength. And now?" Catherall looked at the journalist with eyes that had seen too much. "Now I know the truth. Humans are not brave. Humans are afraid. They are always afraid. They feel fear more deeply than any species I have ever encountered. They know they are fragile. They know they can die. And how do they fight? They carry their fear with them. They take it into battle and make it into a weapon. They do not fight despite their mortality. They fight because of it. Every human soldier knows that they will die someday. They have accepted this. And because they have accepted it, they are free." The journalist seemed confused. "Free? Free from the thing that controls the rest of us. Free from the instinct to survive at any cost. When a human decides that something is worth dying for, nothing in the universe can stop them. Not pain, not injury, not the certainty of death. They will keep coming. They will never stop. Catherall paused, remembering Nathan's smile as he died. Remembering Derek Cole holding that choke point alone. Remembering Katie Brennan refusing to leave her people behind. You asked me what it felt like to fight alongside humanity. I will tell you the truth. It felt like dread. Dread? That they were your allies. Yes, and that is what frightened me most. I have seen what humans will do for those they call friends. I have seen them endure the unendurable. I have seen them hold the line when all hope was lost, not because they believed they would win, but because giving up was simply not something they were capable of. The journalist was silent. I pity any species that becomes their enemy, Catherall continued. Do not mistake their kindness for weakness. Do not mistake their tears for fragility. And never, under any circumstances, give them something to fight for. Why? Catherall thought about the war. He thought about the battles he had survived and the friends he had lost. He thought about Nathan Cruz, who had died with a smile on his face because he had saved someone he cared about. Because they will never stop, he said. They will chase you across the galaxy. They will follow you to the edge of existence. They will hunt you with the patience of creatures who evolved to run their prey to exhaustion. And when they finally catch you, when you're too tired to fight and too broken to run, they will look at you with those soft, wet eyes. And they will show you exactly what it means to be human. The interview ended. The journalist left. Catherall sat alone in the quiet room and thought about the future. The war was over. The Scath were defeated. The galaxy was at peace for the first time in generations. And somewhere out there, the humans were building more ships, training more soldiers, and preparing for whatever came next. Catherall had fought beside them. He had learned to respect them, to admire them, even to love them in his own way. But when he thought about humanity spreading across the stars, claiming their place among the ancient species of the galaxy, he felt a cold fear in the depths of his heart, not because he believed they would become enemies, but because he had seen what they were.